Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be talking about my new project of a build. Now, before we get into the video, I just want to state, so the quality of the footage is going to vary wildly, mainly because I have essentially a button that is my single target, that if I press it, the game gets a little laggy. It's the kind of thing that Chris would, wake up at night with nightmares about. A button where I can simply press it and then cause an insane amount of lag to the server. This is okay because it does a lot of damage, so it doesn't make the build worse because of this. It's just simply have fun with the frame rate sometimes, right? So this won't be for everybody. Now that's out of the way, let's just talk about the build. So I wanted to play just a bow character because I've never really invested much into a bow character, and with the addition to Vengeant Cascade, of course, I really wanted to play with it before it got nerfed into oblivion, like I suggest or assume it will in the future. So the first thing that we found was, of course, Voidshot. Voidshot has some really interesting properties when it is procced off of Vengeant Cascade. So if you don't know, Voidfletcher is the unique quiver that allows you to essentially void shot enemies. So whenever you cast a skill that fires a projectile, it will shoot out a void projectile, and that void projectile will scale for your projectile stuff. You can't link it with any supports. It converts cold to 50%, and it also has a bunch of fizz on it. Now, this also does like an explosion, and as it travels, it gets slower, right? So you shoot it out, it starts fast, and then starts losing projectile speed as it moves along. Now, back in the day, this was the meta way of building single target on bow characters because it had an absurd amount of damage scaling because, of course, every single projectile you get, it's more shotgun you get, and of course it scales with the normal fizz conversion stuff that bow characters used to do all the time, so it was an obvious choice. Now, it was kind of overpowered, so they nerfed it into the ground, essentially. It was like a large amount of damage effectiveness it lost. And of course, that's very bad for a skill like this because, you don't have any links. It's literally a fucking quiver, right? Like you can't link it with anything. I'm literally on a one link for my single target, right? So you have to use outside sources to amplify the damage. And it was still a functioning build. You can still use it. But then, of course, 3.21 rolls around and we have Vengeant Cascade. Now, how it interacts with it is very, very, very specific. So since the void projectile, it will, of course, not hit enemies. Like it will pierce through essentially all targets, right? Until it stops at the end of its duration where it kind of explodes, right? So like I said, it will go to wherever your cursor is and stop there. But if you give it enough projectile speed with Vengeant Cascade, it gets a little weird because it shoots out and then it comes back in and then explodes, right? And why that matters is we can abuse things like Longshot from Deadeye. Longshot from Deadeye gives us up to 60% more damage with things at the end of their movement. And of course, since we're shooting out the void projectiles and then they're coming back and they're doing a decent amount of distance, this means that we're getting the full benefit from Longshot every single time because, of course, the projectiles, they're not turning into new projectiles, they're just going out and then coming back in. That still counts as extra projectile length that it's traveled. Now, of course, this also means we can abuse things where enemies are nearby as well at the same time, like, of course, eye to eye. This gets really interesting when you start combining it with things like Arcing Shot from Cluster Jewels, where you get a bunch of increased damage and crit chance from projectiles that go far away, and allows us to scale our void shots a lot more efficiently than before, because before we would just use point blank, which is only a 30% more damage modifier, and it was okay. It was good enough back in the day, but now we have more technology at our disposal. Now, this is not enough to make it work. Now, another thing that has been added to the game since Void Shot was a relevant skill is, of course, Sniper's Mark. If you don't know how Sniper's Mark works, it makes it so that you mark the enemy and 4 projectiles. They'll shoot out from the target whenever you hit it with a projectile. So if I hit with a void shot, then it will shoot out 4 projectiles at a base, and then 7, because we have 75% mark effect from our Deadeye stuff, focal point or whatever it's called. And that means every single time I shoot, I not only get the 5 projectiles at base I have, one of the projectiles will hit the target and snipers mark an extra 7 projectiles around the target. So every single time we shoot, we are getting 12 projectiles now instead, which is, of course, crazy. We did not have that before, and if this existed beforehand, it would have been really overpowered. Now, we're not entirely sure if every single projectile that hits counts, but we do know that at the very least, some projectiles are being applied to Sniper's Mark. Now, this is very interesting because the normal projectile, when you shoot out with Void Shot, it does not interact with Sniper's Mark for some reason. But when it returns, it seems like as though it is interacting with Sniper's Mark. We don't know why. It might be because it gets the end of the travel. It might be because of some other god-awful reason. But whatever it is, we're abusing Sniper's Mark. And you can see it in the footage when I am standing a very specific distance away from the enemy. So if you scale your projectile speed enough, the void shot will, of course, shoot out and then shoot back in and kind of land a little bit in front of you. And that is perfect for our purposes because it allows us to aim properly on single target. And this is affected by, of course, projectile speed. This is also affected by where we put our cursor as well. Like, it's affected by a lot of stuff. It's kind of weird to play around with, but once you've played it enough and you understand where you need to stand and shoot, it gets a lot better and a lot more consistent. So if you can see in the footage right now, I'm doing just some beast farming strats with like Harbinger on the side. I'm skipping beasts that I don't want to farm, and I'm killing the beasts I want. Essentially, whenever I see a beast that I want, I stand on it, I apply my single target setup, and kablamo, there goes my FPS. But the beast is blown to smithereens as well. I don't know how Einhar keeps the beast in the menagerie when it's in pieces like that, but whatever, to each their own. Now, this is all interesting and all, but the biggest problem with this void shot stuff is when you do it this specific way, the clear is god awful because what happens is they shoot out in a cone and they come back in a cone, meaning they all group up. This is insane for single target, but it's terrible for clear. So that's why we implement a clear button with, of course, Scourge Arrow. We have a 4-link Scourge Arrow, as you can tell in this footage. Would you believe that if I told you this was a 4-link, right? We're clearing just fine. And whenever we shoot with our Scourge Arrow, we also shoot out the void shots as well, which helps us clean up the rares as well. All of that combined is great. Now, another thing that is really cool is the fact that, like, instead of Ice Shot, which was really laggy, right? Scourge Arrow just pierces all targets as well. Like, it does a lot of things, and also as well, its interaction with the Vengeant Cascade makes it into a very good clear skill. Even if I'm not channeling it, I'm just spamming the button, my clear feels fantastic. Now, the only problem with this is I have to click a bunch, like tap the button of Scourge Arrow a bunch to keep it going because it's a channel. Tap, release, tap, release, tap, release. But if you're playing Ice Shot, you can hold the button down, but Ice Shot is 1, less damage, 2, laggier, and 3, just not as good. Scourge Arrow is the superior option here for clear, especially on a 4-link. I have no idea why I'm able to do this on a 4-link. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that I've done to scale this build specifically. Now, I want to talk about one more mechanic, but I do need to go in game for that. So we're going to go in game real quick and explain one last thing. This is not meant to be a guide. This is meant to be this is what I've been working on kind of video. I need to do significant revamps to this build to make it good for endgame, because we need significant more single target, which we can easily achieve once I get some upgrades. But yeah, with all that being said, let's go in game, shall we? All right, here we are in game with the character. My name is not a Blade Dancer, it's an inside joke. Now, one of the main problems with, of course, Voidfletcher here is the fact that you only have a maximum of 5 void charges and you only get 2 per second. That is a very low amount of charges in general. So if I just of course, use my barrage, look at that. We're instantly out and we have to wait for more void charges. We do not like this. We want as much projectiles as humanly possible. And if there was a way to scale more void arrows per second, right, we could do infinite amount of single target, which of course, this is what we're doing. So we have a node here, which is called from our elegant humors. It is Victario. It is called Supreme Grandstanding. This is a tech that has existed for a while, and that's what people used to use with this setup. But essentially, Supreme Grandstanding gives us so that nearby allies and enemies share charges with you. That means if you have frenzy charges, your allies have frenzy charges. If you have endurance charges, your nearby allies have endurance charges. Same thing with enemies, all of that. So if you have frenzy charges, your nearby enemies will also have frenzy charges too. So you have to be careful with this. Otherwise, you can get into a very sketchy situation. The last part of the line doesn't really matter. Now, this is important because we can use something like, of course, Blink Arrow here. And whenever I make a Blink Arrow, it uses my quiver and my bow. That is how Mirror Arrow Blink Arrow scales. It's like a minion, but it uses a copy of our quiver and our bow. So for instance here, I create a clone here. As you can tell here, he is gaining void charges. As he is gaining void charges, that means as he's gaining them, I'm gaining them as well, thanks to Supreme Grandstanding. Which means, of course, I can show you here, I can get a lot more void charges than normal. And this can be scaled ridiculously. And how do we do that? Well, there is, let me go find a pack here. So we utilize something called Mirror Arrow. We use like ballistas, right? And these ballistas will summon a bunch for us, right? As they're summoning us a bunch, we can do essentially this and hold down the button with barrage. And that is great. It is wonderful. Now, the reason why we're using ballista is because it will summon the totems for us, right? And we summon the mirror arrows for us, which is great, right? It will automate the process, or of course we can use mirror arrow, blink arrow. The reason why we're able to do it easily this patch is because of the existence of this notable on our Crucible tree. Trigger level 20 blink arrow when you attack with a mirror arrow, and the same thing the other way around. This means whenever I use mirror arrow, I trigger a blink arrow. So I have 2 clones, right? Which is great. But when you take it and put it on a totem, right? As you can tell on my upper left, I will show you, as it starts using the charges, they create 2 every single time because it counts, because whenever you're using it, because your totems count as you, right? And they start using it and they make a lot more than you normally would have, right? Same thing with me, yada, yada, yada. And all of that combined means that, of course, we get a lot more charges than normal. And this means we need to spam a lot less to actually get to those charges, right? And the more charges we get, the more single target we get. So if we have 20 clones, that is about 10 charges per second. And if we use a projectile skill like barrage, that is shooting a bunch of projectiles per second, it means that we're consuming our void charges as well. We're also, of course, making them, which means, of course, we get a bunch of increased void charges, which then is turned into damage. Yeah, that's the main mechanic that makes it so we actually scale void charges. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build so far. Like I said, there won't be a POB for this one because I'm not finished yet. This is just simply an explanation of the mechanics so that I can link it whenever I make the build guide. All that being said, I'm going to go work on updating this build and investing into it more. See ya!